Hey guys, how you doing? Books. I read books recently. Let's talk about these books. I just wanted to talk about some books that I read recently and would like to talk about. Story of My Life by J. McInerney. J. McInerney. Sounds like I'm saying Ernie, like Benny Hill did in Ernie the Fastest Milkman in the West. If you don't know what that song is, then that's basic. I don't. I'll be highly surprised if anyone in the comments knows that song. This is by a New York author who was a member of the Literary Brat Pack in the 80s. He was friends with Bret Easton Ellis. He wrote a very sort of similar style to him about young people living in a world full of consumerism and the problems of, finding love and all that sort of stuff. And this is the second book I've read from him. The first one was Bright Lights Big City, which is a great book written in second person. But this one I didn't like as much. I thought it was an alright book, but it's basically about a supermodel who appears in apparently an American Psycho. She shows up by Ellis. I haven't read that one yet. But this is basically about her and her life as an aspiring actress, and she wants to find love and she meets all these different guys and stuff. And I thought it was very similar to... I believe I referenced this book recently, these two books very recently in a video. I don't know which video it was, but I think I've referenced them in a similar way to Portnoy's Complaint and Factotum by Philip Roth and Charles Bukowski, respectively. In which, it's a sort of book that it's funny, engaging, and an interesting idea, but the problem is the idea stops being interesting about a quarter or halfway through the book. I believe I did that analogy very recently. Can't remember what it was. But that's basically how I felt about this book. It's funny at times, but it gets to the point where, if you really want me to stay invested in this book and reading, you've got to do something more than just repeat the same plot points over and over again. Then I read Lonesome Traveler by Jack Kerouac. This is a non-fiction. I recently did this in a book haul video. This was mentioned in that. I can't remember if I'd read it at that point or not. The Story of My Life wasn't in that. That wasn't that one. But I mentioned this there, and it's basically a bunch of non-fiction writings of Jack Kerouac, who is one of my favourite authors. Not really much to say about it other than the fact that, it was pretty great, and I still haven't yet read On the Road. The second story in here, which is about Kerouac in Mexico, is fantastic. It's the best piece of writing I've ever seen from him, read from him. Then I read my first Ernest Hemingway book, Fiesta, The Sun Also Rises. This was good, way better than I was expecting. Hemingway's writing style is so easy to read, it's so simplistic and plain in a way, but it truly contains all the description that you really, really want in a book. It's not barren to the point of being uninteresting. It's very descriptive and beautiful, I think. And this is a story about a love triangle between a soldier from the First World War, obvious stand-in for Hemingway, a woman, and another guy. I was surprised that I found myself so gripped in this, but once again, I didn't absolutely love this book, but I really recommend this. I don't know if I'm going to read other stuff by him, because his other books don't interest me as much, but Farewell to Arms seems so interesting, and, A Movable Feast. That's the other one I want to read out of the main ones. Then I read one of the most difficult books I've read in a while, Mao II, by Don DeLillo. This book was so difficult. People say this is a hard book to read, and I was sort of, I was like, is it really? Because I've read Libre, which, it's recently reviewed, and I've read White Noise, which I absolutely love. So I was thinking, sure, it can't be that hard. And it's shorter. It's by about 200 pages shorter than those two books. This was a challenge to get through, genuinely. The way DeLillo writes, if you listen to how I describe his prose in Libre, it's that all turned up even more. It did some beautiful, beautiful writing in this novel, but so much of it just goes on, and not necessarily like a negative way. I thought it was a really great book, but it was sort of a bit too, not long-winded, but it spent a lot of time describing things that just weren't interesting to the plot, but at the same time paint such a vivid portrait of the characters. But you know, in some books when you read it and nothing really is happening plot-wise, but you still enjoy it and you don't feel the length. This is not like that. You feel, even though it's still a good book that I enjoyed, the writing makes it feel long and you really feel the time. This is about a writer who is probably Thomas Pynchon, maybe, I don't know, who is a recluse and he's been struggling to write a novel for years. And then there's a hostage situation, there's a cult, and then there's a couple of the main characters. I think a good comparison would be to Dark Souls, a boss in Dark Souls. Incredibly difficult to beat, especially when you're playing it for the first time. But when you've beaten it, you feel this sense of accomplishment. Then I read Ask the Dust by, I don't know how to say this author's name, John Fante. I'm just going to call him John Fante. This was a big inspiration on Charles Bukowski. He wrote the introduction, and that's how I know this book. It's from the 1930s, 38, I want to say. It's about a writer who wins a bit of money from writing a short story, and then he falls in love with this Mexican waitress who is mentally not stable, and this book is pretty damn good, but once again, there was just something about it that in a similar... It wasn't boring, it didn't get repetitive, but there was something about it that I was reading it, and it's quick to read, it's very quick and easy, and I was scared, but I didn't feel like I was getting much from it. I was getting the plot from it, but when you read it, it's kind of bare bones, there isn't much description, and there's a very distinct voice, but unlike with Hemingway, it doesn't feel as rich, which I get it, and I think especially for its time, when books were very overwritten, which is why I have, a disdain for pre-Beat Generation literature a lot of the time, this one is completely opposite of that, and I can totally respect why that's so influential and important. This is an important novel, and there's a movie with Colin Farrell and Salma Hayek, written by, and I directed it, Robert Towne, who is the genius who wrote the script of Chinatown, amongst other things. And he said that this was the great Los Angeles novel, I believe. And obviously Charles Bukowski loved it. This book has lots of fans, and unfortunately, I'm not particularly one of them. I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was good, and the ending was really good in an infuriating way. An author does that on purpose. But it was just kind of... I'd finished reading it, I didn't really get anything from it. I think that's what I'm trying to say with this book. I think the reason why I gave this a 3 out of 5 was because I wanted it to be better. It had so much potential to be better, and it just... just the glasses. The book... It had so much potential to be a great book, but it just fell short for me. And I thought I'd give a quick update on what I'm reading currently. I'm reading The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño. This is a long book for me. It's 500 pages. I don't read long books as much, but I'm trying to get through longer books. I'm trying to... I recently got rid of the Goodreads reading challenge. I'll probably do a whole video on that. But... I think instead of trying to count how many books I can read and force myself to read shorter books, I'm going to read some longer books. And this is fantastic so far. I'm about 50 pages in. It's very good. It's about a poet in Mexico in the mid-1970s. That's really all it is so far. And about this group of poets called the Visceral Realists. I like this book so far. So let's see how the book goes. If you want to see any of my ratings of books, or recommend me books, or see what I'm reading at the moment, you can always follow my Goodreads, which is always linked in the description along with my Instagram. They're both in the description, because why not? That's what YouTubers do, right? So that's the books that I've read recently. What books have you been reading recently, and what books should I read based on these suggestions? Thanks for watching, everybody, like always, and always remember, stay beautiful.